My wife said, "I don't think this marriage will last another year. He's so far below my level." They laughed. I said, "Let's end it now." That night, her best friend's message froze me. I came home after pulling a double shift at the warehouse, exhausted, covered in dust, every muscle screaming for rest. All I wanted was a hot shower, maybe some leftover pizza, and my bed. The house was lit up when I pulled into the driveway, which was odd because it was almost 11 on a Wednesday night. I walked through the front door and heard voices coming from the living room. Laughter, the clink of wine glasses. My wife Jessica was having her friends over, which she did sometimes, usually on weekends, but I figured maybe they were celebrating something. I dropped my keys on the hallway table, kicked off my boots, and started heading toward the kitchen to grab some water. That's when I heard her voice, clear as day, cutting through the chatter. "I honestly don't think this marriage will last another year," she said, and there was this tone in her voice, almost like she was complaining about a bad haircut. I froze in the hallway, just out of sight, hidden by the wall. The conversation continued, and I heard one of her friends ask something I couldn't make out completely, but Jessica's response came through perfectly clear. "He's falling so far below my level. It's embarrassing," she said, and her friends laughed, actually laughed, like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. My heart started pounding, not from anger yet, but from this weird disbelief, like maybe I was hearing things wrong. I stood there in that hallway, in my dirty work clothes, smelling like sweat and cardboard, and just listened. "I mean, he works at a warehouse, for God's sake." Jessica continued, her voice getting more animated now, like she was really getting into it. "I have a marketing degree. I work at Henderson Marketing downtown, and he's just stuck there, going nowhere." One of her friends said something supportive. I think it was Vanessa, and then Jessica responded again. No, I'm done making excuses for him. I really am," she said, and I could hear glasses clinking, like they were toasting to that statement. Something inside me just snapped in that moment. Not in a loud, explosive way, but quietly, like a thread breaking. I realized right then that this wasn't just venting. This wasn't just her having a bad day or blowing off steam with her friends. This was what she really thought of me. This was how she saw our marriage, our life together, me. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked into the living room. The conversation died instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. For women sitting on my couch with wine glasses, faces flushed from drinking, smiles fading the second they saw me standing there in the doorway. Jessica's eyes went wide, her mouth opened slightly, and I could see the panic starting to creep across her face, the realization that I'd heard everything. I looked at her, just looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch out and get uncomfortable. Then I said, very calmly, keeping my voice steady and controlled, "You're right. Why wait a year? Let's end it now." The room went completely silent, like someone had hit a mute button on reality. You could have heard a pin drop. Jessica stood up fast, nearly knocking over her wine glass on the coffee table, red wine sloshing dangerously close to the edge. "Wait, Jake, I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, her words tumbling out. "We were just talking. It was girl talk. You know how it is." I shook my head slowly, still maintaining that eerie calm that I felt settling over me like a blanket. "No, you meant every word," I said simply. "I could hear it in your voice." Her friends started gathering their purses, suddenly very interested in leaving, muttering awkward goodbyes as they shuffled toward the door like they couldn't get out fast enough. The whole scene was falling apart, and they wanted no part of it. Vanessa looked back at me as she was leaving, and there was this expression on her face I couldn't quite read, something between pity and respect. Like she understood something the others didn't. Jessica was following me as I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom, her voice getting higher, more frantic with each step. "Jake, please, you're overreacting," she kept saying, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor behind me. I was venting, that's all. Everyone vents about their spouse sometimes. But I wasn't listening anymore, not really. I pulled out a duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet and started throwing clothes into it, not being neat about it, just grabbing handfuls of underwear, shirts, jeans, socks. I went to the bathroom and grabbed my toothbrush, my razor, my deodorant. She grabbed my arm, trying to physically stop me from packing, and I gently pulled away, not rough, just firm enough to make it clear I was done. "You said I'm below your level," I said, finally letting some emotion creep into my voice. "Maybe you're right, maybe I am. So let's both go find someone on our own level." I grabbed my phone charger from the nightstand, my wallet from the dresser, and zipped up the duffel bag. Jessica was crying now, real tears streaming down her face, mascara starting to run. "We can work on this. We can go to counseling," she said desperately. "Please don't leave. Jake, please, we can fix this." But I was already walking past her, down the hallway, through the living room where just minutes ago I'd been humiliated without even being in the room. I could see the wine glasses still sitting there, the bottle half empty on the table. Jessica followed me all the way to the front door, still pleading. "Jake, stop. Just stop and think about this," she said, reaching for my arm again. I turned back one last time, standing in the doorway with my bag over my shoulder, and looked at her, really looked at her. "You don't respect me," I said quietly, "and I'm done being with someone who doesn't respect me." Then I walked out, closing the door behind me, cutting off whatever she was about to say. I got in my truck, threw the duffel bag on the passenger seat, and just sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. I could see her silhouette in the window, watching me. I started the engine and drove away, not looking back. I ended up at a motel off Highway 47, one of those cheap places with a flickering neon sign that said vacancy in blue and red letters. The clerk barely looked at me when I paid cash for a room, just handed me a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag. Room 14, second floor, smelling like cigarettes and cheap cleaning products. I threw my bag on the bed, which had a faded floral comforter that had seen better days, and sat down on the edge. I waited for the pain to hit, for the sadness, for the regret, but instead I just felt this overwhelming sense of relief, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down. My phone started buzzing again, Jessica calling, and I just stared at it, watching her name light up the screen over and over until it finally went to voicemail. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing like crazy, the screen lighting up over and over on the nightstand. I reached for it with one eye still closed, squinting at the brightness, and saw dozens of missed calls and text messages filling up the screen. Most were from Jessica, a chaotic mix of emotions playing out in digital form. The first few were apologies, desperate and pleading. Then they shifted to anger, accusing me of being dramatic and childish, then back to begging again. I scrolled through them without really reading, just getting the general vibe of panic and manipulation. I turned off all notifications from her number, silenced everything, and lay back on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles and wondering how I'd ended up here. The room smelled like stale smoke and industrial carpet cleaner, but somehow it felt more honest than my own house had in months. Around noon, after I'd forced myself to shower and put on clean clothes, my phone buzzed again. This time it was from a number I recognized, but rarely saw pop up on my screen: Vanessa, Jessica's best friend from college. They'd known each other for years, been roommates before Jessica and I got married, went to spin class together every Saturday morning. The message was short and urgent, asking me to call her, saying it was important. Something in my gut told me this wasn't a setup or some kind of intervention on Jessica's behalf. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that message for a solid 5 minutes, weighing my options. Finally, I called her back. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been sitting there waiting with the phone in her hand. Her voice was low and tense, like she was worried someone might overhear, and what she told me in the next 10 minutes made my blood run cold. Jessica had been planning to divorce me for months, since February, right after that Valentine's weekend trip to the mountains that I thought had gone well. She'd hired a lawyer, started building a case, and had been deliberately trying to provoke me into leaving first so she could claim abandonment and get a better settlement. Every argument we'd had in the past few months suddenly made sense. Every criticism, every cold shoulder, every time she'd pushed my buttons until I snapped. It had all been calculated, part of a strategy her lawyer had probably suggested. Vanessa explained that she'd gone along with the conversation the night before because she thought it was just normal venting, the kind of thing friends do when they're frustrated. But when I walked out and she saw the look on Jessica's face, she realized it had been a setup. Jessica had wanted me to overhear that conversation, had orchestrated the whole thing to push me into walking out, but she'd expected me to come crawling back within a day or two so she could document a pattern of instability. My leaving permanently had caught her off guard, ruined her timeline. Vanessa said she couldn't just stand by and watch it happen, that it wasn't right, and she'd taken screenshots of text messages Jessica had sent her over the past few months discussing the divorce strategy, the lawyer consultations, the plans to split assets. She sent me those screenshots right there during the call, and I sat in that dingy motel room staring at my phone screen, reading messages from my wife talking about how she needed to make me look bad, how she needed documentation of me being an absent or negligent husband, how she was planning to get the house, and make me responsible for most of the debt. It was all there, laid out in blue and gray text bubbles, proof that my marriage had been a calculated takedown for months, and I'd been completely oblivious. After I hung up with Vanessa, I didn't break down or fall apart like I thought I might. Instead, I felt something cold and focused rising up inside me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. If Jessica wanted to play games, if she wanted to manipulate and scheme, then I needed to be smarter, faster, and more prepared than she was. I called a divorce attorney that afternoon, a guy named Marcus Chun who came highly recommended on some legal forums I'd been scrolling through. His office was downtown, clean and professional, the kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't mess around. I showed him everything, the screenshots from Vanessa, the timeline of events, the fact that I'd left the house without taking anything that wasn't mine. Marcus listened carefully, took detailed notes, and then told me something that actually gave me hope for the first time in 24 hours. Jessica had made a critical mistake by showing her hand too early, and now we had evidence of her intent, which actually worked in my favor. Over the next 3 days, I barely slept. I gathered bank statements, credit card records, proof of every payment I'd made on our mortgage, our cars, our bills. I documented everything, created a paper trail that showed I'd been a responsible partner, that I'd contributed equally, if not more, to our household. I made spreadsheets, organized folders, treated it like a project at work because that's the only way I could keep myself from thinking too hard about what it all meant. Marcus advised me to return to the house at least once to establish that I hadn't abandoned it, that I was still a legal resident with every right to be there. The law in our state was clear about this. If I stayed away too long without any contact, Jessica could use it against me. So on Thursday evening, I drove back, my stomach in knots, mentally preparing myself for whatever Jessica might throw at me. She was there when I walked in, sitting on the couch in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. She stood up the second she saw me, and I could see her brain working, trying to figure out what approach to take, what mask to put on. She started with the soft, wounded voice, talking about how we couldn't just throw away 4 years of marriage, how we needed to work on things, how she'd made a mistake, but still loved me. I didn't engage, didn't respond, just walked past her toward the bedroom to gather more of my things. She followed me, her voice rising slightly, trying different angles, different emotional appeals. Then I told her I knew about February, about the lawyer, about the whole plan. Her face went through a rapid transformation, pale to red to pale again, and she immediately demanded to know who had told me. I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that her careful strategy had been exposed. She started accusing Vanessa, calling her a backstabbing traitor, her voice getting louder and more desperate. I cut her off, told her it didn't matter who told me. What mattered was that it was true and we both knew it. I grabbed my laptop, some important documents from the filing cabinet, my grandfather's watch from the dresser, things I'd forgotten in my rush to leave the first time. Jessica tried a few more times to spin the narrative, to make herself the victim, to cry and plead and accuse, cycling through every emotional manipulation technique she had. But I wasn't listening anymore, wasn't absorbing it, wasn't letting it affect me. I walked out of that house for the second time in less than a week, but this time I wasn't running away in pain. I was walking away with purpose and a plan. The next morning, Marcus filed the divorce papers, and I had them served to Jessica at her office, professional and public, exactly the way she'd probably planned to do to me. I didn't feel victorious or triumphant. I just felt like I'd finally stopped being a victim and started taking control of my own life. Jessica received the divorce papers on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a process server right to her desk at Henderson Marketing, where she worked. I know this because Vanessa told me later that Jessica had called her immediately afterward, hysterical, screaming about betrayal and humiliation. Apparently, half her office had seen the server walk in and ask for her by name, and word spread fast in that kind of environment. I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. It was just something that needed to happen, a necessary step in untangling our lives. Her lawyer reached out to Marcus within 2 days, trying to negotiate, trying to find some middle ground, but all the leverage Jessica thought she had was gone. The screenshots Vanessa had provided showed clear intent to manipulate the situation, and Marcus made sure opposing counsel understood we had documentation of everything. The strategy Jessica had spent months building, the careful narrative she'd constructed about me being a deadbeat husband who abandoned her, it all crumbled because she'd gotten cocky and told her friends too much. Over the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as Jessica's life started falling apart in ways I never could have predicted. Vanessa and two other friends from that wine night, including a woman named Lindsay who I'd always thought was reasonable, they all distanced themselves from her. Vanessa told me later that Jessica had lashed out at everyone, accused them of siding with me, called them traitors, and generally burned every bridge she had. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same people she'd expected to back her up in the divorce were now the ones providing evidence against her. The actual legal process was surprisingly straightforward once everything was laid out. We'd been married for 4 years. No kids, no major joint assets except the house, which was underwater on the mortgage anyway. Jessica had pushed for us to buy it 2 years ago, insisted we needed to upgrade our lifestyle, and I'd gone along with it even though the payments stretched our budget thin. Now she was stuck with a property she couldn't afford on her own, and I was perfectly fine letting her have it in exchange for walking away clean. The cars were in our individual names. Mine was paid off. Hers still had 3 years of payments left. Credit card debt got split down the middle, which meant she took on more than she'd expected because most of it was from her shopping habits and girls' trips that I'd never been part of. My savings account, the one I'd been quietly building for years from overtime and side jobs, that stayed mine because I kept it separate and could prove every deposit came from my earnings alone. Then something completely unexpected happened in August, about 2 months into the divorce proceedings. I got a call from Jessica's mother, Patricia, a woman I'd always gotten along with surprisingly well. She'd never been warm exactly, but she'd been fair, treated me with basic respect, which was more than I could say for most of Jessica's family. Patricia asked if we could meet for coffee, said she needed to talk to me about something important, and against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe near her house, and she looked older than I remembered, tired and worn down. She got straight to the point, told me she'd found out what Jessica had been planning, how she'd been manipulating the situation, and she was ashamed. Patricia explained that she'd raised Jessica to be independent and ambitious, but somewhere along the way, those qualities had twisted into entitlement and contempt for anyone she perceived as beneath her. She apologized for not seeing it sooner, for not stepping in when she noticed how Jessica talked about me at family gatherings. Then she told me something that made my jaw drop. Jessica had been having an affair since January, about 8 months by that point, with a guy from her office named Derek, some assistant director in her department, who drove a BMW and wore expensive suits. Patricia had discovered it by accident when she'd stopped by Jessica's house unannounced one evening and found evidence she couldn't ignore, receipts from expensive hotels, text messages left open on an iPad. The affair explains so much: the sudden shift in Jessica's behavior, the increased criticism, the elaborate divorce plan starting in February. Patricia said that from what she'd pieced together, Derek was married himself, going through his own messy separation, and had made it clear to Jessica that he wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to pass time with while his own divorce played out. Jessica had apparently convinced herself that once both divorces were finalized, she and Derek would end up together, that he'd leave his wife for her completely. But Derek had never promised that, had actually been pretty upfront that he wasn't ready for commitment, and Jessica had just heard what she wanted to hear. That's why she'd panicked so badly when I left, Patricia explained. Jessica's whole plan had been to control the narrative, to leave me on her terms while keeping me as a backup option in case things with Derek didn't work out the way she hoped. When I'd walked out immediately and filed first, it had shattered her illusion of control. She wasn't crying because she loved me or wanted me back. She was crying because I'd disrupted her carefully laid plans and left her scrambling. Patricia said she'd already given this information to my lawyer, wanted to make sure I had every advantage in the divorce, said it was the least she could do after watching her daughter treat me so poorly for months. I sat there in that cafe, coffee getting cold in front of me, processing the fact that my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law was actively helping me divorce her daughter. Marcus used the affair information strategically, and Jessica's lawyer advised her to settle quickly before things got even messier. By September, 3 months after that night, I'd overheard her trashing me to her friends. We were officially divorced. The settlement was more favorable than I'd expected. I walked away with my savings intact, my truck, half of our minimal joint assets, and none of the house debt. Jessica got the house, the mortgage payments, and her car loan, exactly what she'd wanted on paper, except now she had to handle it all alone while Derek, according to Patricia, had completely ended things with her once word got around the office about the divorce and the drama. Apparently having an affair was one thing in Derek's mind, but being publicly associated with Jessica's messy divorce was another, and he distanced himself fast to protect his own reputation and his reconciliation attempts with his actual wife. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment across town, nothing fancy, but it was mine and mine alone. I threw myself into work, picked up extra shifts, volunteered for projects nobody else wanted. My supervisor noticed, started giving me more responsibility, and by November, I'd been promoted to shift supervisor with a decent pay raise. It wasn't glamorous. I was still working at a warehouse, still coming home tired and sore, but I was building something, moving forward instead of being stuck. Around that same time, I started talking more with Clara, a woman who worked in the warehouse office handling invoices and shipping manifests. We'd always been friendly, exchanged hellos and small talk, but after my divorce finalized, she asked me to grab coffee one afternoon. We talked for 2 hours at a diner near work, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years. She knew about my divorce. Everyone at work did because I'd had to adjust my schedule for court dates, but she didn't pry or ask for details. She just listened when I wanted to talk and changed the subject when I didn't. We started seeing each other casually, nothing serious at first, just movies and dinners and long drives on weekends. What struck me most about Clara was how easy everything felt, how there was no drama, no games, no feeling like I had to walk on eggshells or prove my worth. She worked hard, had her own apartment, her own life, and she treated me like an equal partner, not a project to fix or something to be embarrassed about. By December, 6 months after everything had imploded, I realized I'd gone entire days without thinking about Jessica or the marriage or any of it. I was sleeping better, eating better, actually enjoying my life instead of just surviving it. I'd reconnected with some friends I'd lost touch with over the years, started going to the gym again, picked up reading, things I'd let fall away when I was too exhausted from trying to be enough for someone who'd already decided I wasn't. Jessica tried to reach out a few times through text, always late at night, always with that same mix of regret and accusation. I never responded, just deleted the messages and moved on. Patricia stayed in touch, sent me a Christmas card that year with a handwritten note apologizing again and wishing me well. I appreciated it more than I could express, the acknowledgement that I hadn't been crazy, that I hadn't deserved what happened. Looking back now, almost a year later, I can see how that one night changed everything. Not just because I left, but because I finally understood something important. You can't make someone respect you, you can't argue them into valuing you, and you definitely can't fix a relationship where one person has already checked out and is planning their exit while you're still trying to make things work. The affair, the manipulation, the careful planning, none of it was about me being not good enough. It was about Jessica being someone I never really knew, someone who valued appearances and status over actual partnership, someone who saw people as stepping stones rather than partners. She'd wanted to trade up, thought she'd found someone better, and when that didn't work out the way she'd fantasized, she'd tried to keep me as a fallback option. But I wasn't anyone's backup plan, and walking away from that realization was the best thing I ever did. I found an apartment, a job I'm good at, a woman who sees me as an equal, and most importantly, I found my self-respect again. That's the real victory, not the divorce settlement, not exposing her affair, but realizing that my worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion of me. And that realization, that freedom, is something nobody can ever take away. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.